While there are many popular misconceptions about philosophy, we'll look at two of the big ones. The first one is this, that philosophy is just a matter of opinion. Now, an opinion is a belief. So if someone says, it's my opinion that we should go spend more money on social programs, or less, they're saying that they believe that. So if someone says, my opinion is we should spend less on social programs, they're saying it's their opinion. Now, an opinion is typically taken in popular usage as an unsupported opinion. An adequately supported opinion, well established by evidence, can become a fact. A statement that has been established as very likely to be true. So what is the misconception? Well, the misconception is this. It is assumed that there are no better or worse opinions on philosophical matters. So, any position is as good as any other, and there's really no point in discussing it except, for entertainment value. So once you've stated your opinion, that's enough. It should be accepted as being as good as anyone else's opinion. This misconception typically involves two assumptions. First, philosophical positions are simply opinions. Second, all opinions are equally good. So let's look at these assumptions. Are philosophical positions simply opinions? Well, philosophy does begin with an opinion. What a person, you or me, or anybody else, thinks about a particular issue, like the existence of God, or the nature of time, or things like ethics, like is murdering people okay? Now, the actual practice of philosophy involves reasoning about and arguing for the position in question. So, a position backed up with arguments is not simply a matter of opinion. The position is obviously now supported with evidence. Now, assuming that logic and reasoning are not simply matters of opinion, these supported opinions cannot be dismissed as simply being just opinions. So if someone wants to disagree with a supported position from a logical standpoint, they'll need to provide arguments of their own. Otherwise, there's no reason to accept their opinion over the supported opinion. So let's go to the second matter, which is the question of this. Are all opinions equally good? Now, it's often assumed that people are entitled to their own opinions, and it follows from this that all opinions are equally good. This often arises from the notion of democracy, that each person is equal, and also the notion of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, that people have the freedom to say what they wish. However, the notion that people are equal in terms of democracy, they all, get to vote, for example, then it doesn't follow that a person's opinions are therefore equally good. Also, even though I certainly agree that everyone should have freedom of expression, it doesn't follow that free expression entails that what people say is all equally good. Now, to use a kind of a silly analogy, suppose we believed in freedom of cooking, which I guess we kind of do, but it doesn't follow that everyone's equally a good cook, even if we believed in freedom of cooking. And the same would hold for freedom of expression. Just because people have a right to express themselves and believe things, it doesn't follow that what they express or believe is therefore true. So the notion that all opinions are equally good does seem rather implausible. To use some obvious examples, if a person develops a serious medical condition, cancer, or COVID-19, they won't go ask a 5-year-old kid what they should do. They would go to a medical doctor because the medical doctor's opinion is better. If you planning on flying, which probably shouldn't do anytime soon in light of the pandemic, but if you're going on a flight, you would want a plane designed by aeronautical engineers rather than just some random person off the street. If somebody said, hey, I can build you a plane, you say, well, do you know anything about designing planes? Like, well, I've heard of planes. So obviously they're, not all opinions are equally good. Now, when it comes to philosophy, people often think, well, philosophy, why should that be treated like medicine or, engineering, etc.? Well, if we allow expertise in areas, which we certainly should, then we'd have to accept that the same thing would apply in philosophy as well, that there are better or worse, positions and opinions. Now, there's also kind of an interesting argument, which I have stolen from Plato, that it's logically self-refuting. If all opinions are equally good, then the opinion that not all opinions are equally good is as good as the opinion that all opinions are equally good. This is a contradiction that arises from the assumption that all opinions are equally good. Therefore, the claim that all opinions are equally good must be rejected. It's kind of a reductio ad absurdum. Now, the view that all opinions are equally good, and philosophy is all, put it roughly, all just BS, is often based on the more sophisticated views known as relativism and subjectivism. So what are these? What is relativism? What is subjectivism? How do they connect to this? Relativism is the view that truth is relative. I know, shocking. That's what it would mean. Typically, people tie it to a particular culture, that truth depends on your culture. It could also be depending on a time and a place. And there are various particular types of relativism. For example, if you happen to take the ethics class, you'll see moral relativism or ethical relativism, the view that moral truths are culturally relative and not universal. Put roughly, and we'll see this when we talk about ethics in this course, when in Rome, the Romans' views are morally right. Now, if you're a relativist about truth, you would hold that truth would vary from culture to culture, or perhaps subculture to subculture. So there'd be things that are true depending on where you are. Now, it's important to distinguish between this and truths about cultures. For example, there are truths about American culture that are not true about, say, Saudi Arabian culture. There are truths about, say, American Midwest culture that are not true about, say, American, Eastern, seaboard culture. There'll be differences. So it's important to distinguish between things that are true about something and actual truth. So to say that truth is relative is not to say that some things are true about some things, not about others. For example, it's true I'm from Maine, but the odds are it's not true about you. But that doesn't show that it's relative. It just shows that things are not true about everything. But if a person believes that it's true that I'm from Maine, and that's true, say, for me, and also for someone else, it could be true that me, the very same person, is not from Maine, that would be relativism. That it could be both true I'm from Maine and not true I'm from Maine. I don't mean any like weird paradox where I was born like halfway, across the border into another state or Canada or something. But that it could be true I am from Maine and also not true. So relativism views, again, the truth is relative. Now, what about subjectivism? Well, subjectivism is kind of a more extreme form of relativism. It's the view that truth is completely subjective. It is relative to the specific individual. As with relativism, there are particular types of subjectivism, such as moral subjectivism. That's a view that what's good or bad depends on, well, me, and also on you. And so truth would vary from person to person. True for me, true for you, or perhaps false for you. And again, it's not that it's true about me or true about you, it's that it would be true for me or true or false for you. So relativism is typically group-based, like a culture, subjectivism, individual-based. Now, In informal use, people often smush them together. So they might talk about subjectivism across cultures or across large groups. And when people talk about things like alternative facts, they're embracing subjectivism in the sort of general sense that there's no objective truth. Now, it's often assumed, getting back to our main focus, the misconception about philosophy, it's often assumed that philosophical issues are all relative or subjective in nature. So philosophy is just opinion because that's all it can be. It's got to be relative or subjective. Now, interestingly enough, while relativism and subjectivism are defensible positions, in fact, defensible philosophic positions, to simply assume they are correct, just to say, yep, relativism definitely true, subjectivism definitely true. This would be what's known in philosophy as begging the question, a fallacy. So begging the question, sometimes known as circular reasoning, is a case where a person just assumes what they need to prove. So if someone just says, yep, relativism is true, therefore philosophy is just all opinion, they're begging the question. They've got to prove that relativism is true. Which in a way would be going back to our sort of, paradox and absurdity. To prove that relativism is true requires, in a way, proving that it's not true. Because you'd have to prove that there's a truth, and it's not all relative. Now, there are ways to do this. The sort of sophisticated relativist and subjectivist are usually not relativist about or subjectivist about everything. So they would be willing to say that relativism is true, it's just that other things, there is no objective truth. And that can be argued in a principled way. So a person could be objective about, say, sciences and physics, but totally relative about art and beauty and stuff, that it's all in the eye of the beholder. Now, I mentioned before Plato's response to relativism, and this comes from his Theaetetus. Now, Plato does agree, quite sensibly, that some things are relative. For example, whether a room is chilly or warm varies from person to person. I'm from Maine, so I'm used to cold, and so what feels cold to me might feel like extremely cold to someone else. What feels warm to me might feel cold to someone else. And of course, being from Maine, what feels warm to me might be chilly to someone else. And what might be comfortable to a person not from Maine might be very warm feeling to someone from Maine. Now, Plato argues that relativism is self-refuting. And he was arguing against a fellow named Protagoras, who is a sophist. And we'll see more of the sophists in the future. Protagoras, the sophist, claimed that all opinions are true. Basically embracing really hardcore subjectivism and relativism. So what did Socrates, say back to him, speaking for Plato? Well, this must include the opinions of his opponents, who believe he is wrong. So his belief is false if those who disagree with him have true beliefs. So if he's right, he's wrong. If he's wrong, he's wrong. Now, Socrates also did kind of a sarcastic attack on Protagoras, which was this. Protagoras, being a sophist, didn't teach for free. Socrates did. He didn't accept payment, which is why he was pretty poor. And so Protagoras charged for his teachings. And of course, if someone's going around selling their teaching, you've got to ask yourself, why should I pay for this? And what Protagoras claimed was he was justified in charging people because he was teaching people what they needed to know. But once he claims that his teaching are better than those of others, that he's got it right, he has abandoned his relativism. So this is only effective against Protagoras. It's what's called an ad hominem attack, but in this case it's a fair move because if Protagoras is going around claiming he believes that there is no objective truth, there's no better or worse, and yet he's justifying his charging, saying that there is better and worse, then he's caught himself in an inconsistency. And it's fair to call him on that. Now, that doesn't prove that subjectivism or relativism in general is wrong, but it does show that Protagoras was inconsistent. And of course now he's dead, not from inconsistency, but because he lived a super long time ago. So what should we conclude from all this? Well, we should conclude that it cannot simply be assumed that philosophy is just a matter of opinion. Now, it should also not be assumed that every philosophical issue is objective. Some things might be relative or subjective. Those are viable philosophical positions. So when people say philosophy is just a matter of opinion, they're wrong. It begins with an opinion, and then it's backed up with reasons and evidence and arguments. And simply saying its opinion requires, somewhat ironically, perhaps paradoxically, arguing that this is true. And as Plato argued, this seems to be self-refuting, self-defeating. Now, of course, there's ways to argue around that, but we shall move on next to another popular misconception.